Thanks so much for inviting me to share information on this topic. The Academic Alliance mission is to provide support for direct service providers in implementation of evidence-based practices to increase outcomes on those academic supports for students with disabilities. So looking at progress is definitely one component that is integral to student success. I'm going to stop my video here so we don't have any interruptions during the recording. This webinar is put on by Family Connections, as you know. So let's dive right into the information. What we hope to cover today in this webinar is to define progress monitoring, understand the requirements under IDA, and then demonstrate the purpose and connection to a student's IEP. So to start us off, what is progress monitoring? So progress monitoring is a form of assessment in which student learning is evaluated on a regular basis to provide useful feedback about performance to both students and teachers. So there are a couple of key words that I want to highlight in this definition. The first word is assessment. So progress monitoring is the act of assessing a student on their performance, how they are responding to instruction. And this is done at a frequency, which brings in the word regular basis. So what frequency is needed for that particular student? That could most likely be individualized based on the student. Some data is weekly, some is biweekly, some is multiple times a week, depending on the goal of the skill that you're progress monitoring and the intensity of instruction. Another component of this is the feedback about performance for both students and teachers. So students and teachers really need to know how the students are responding to that instruction that is being provided. Students can help self-monitor their progress on a particular goal or skill, and then teachers use this progress monitoring data to make decisions about instruction. IDEA is very specific that a child's progress toward meeting the annual goals needs to be monitored. Got a couple pop-ins. So this is the how. How will it be measured? And when will these when will the progress be reported? So those are the components that must be included on the IEP. With the progress reports, I do want to note that the IEP amendments that are listed here give examples, but these are not specific. So it is not required that you use quarterly or periodic reports that align with school-based report cards. That is just an example. So the IEP team can decide when those periodic reports on the progress of a child will be given. I wanted to note here also that sorry, I'm having to look at my notes down, so I apologize for that. Nope, that's what I wanted to share on that one. So that's when the progress will be provided. Okay, here we're looking at what it is. And so for the child's services, if you follow me down to where the blue arrow is, this is specific in the law about mentioning where progress is reported based on a student's performance in relation to the general education curriculum. And this means that the general education curriculum is should be accessible to every child and is the state recognized academic standards. So that's what the general education curriculum that is referenced here in this Code of Federal Regulations that you see on the screen. And we should always be talking in terms of how a student is accessing and progressing education curriculum. to note the connection to the Andrew F. decision that was made by the U.S. Supreme Court in March of 2017, because it does connect directly to progress monitoring, and it has made a difference in the approach instructionally and educationally to progress monitoring, widening it up, recognizing the unique needs of all students. So some of the language here in the first bullet that is in the quotes is directly from the decision. Progress monitoring is used to develop appropriate goals on the IEP. And the language was they're reasonably calculated to enable the child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. So these goals will be reasonably calculated. So progress monitoring really helps to inform IEP teams of instructional strategies that have been proven successful when used with a student. So that's reasonably calculated. You have data that shows that. And individualization for opportunities to meet challenging goals and objectives based on the student's unique needs. So that's the in light of the child circumstances part of this. Progress monitoring is also used to monitor the student progress toward the goal. So the Andrew F. decision included the language, the IEP must aim to enable the child to make progress. Progress monitoring provides IEP teams the prompt to review an IEP for a student if the student is not making the expected progress toward his or her annual goal. The IEP team must revise as appropriate the IEP to address the lack of progress. I do want to note here that an IEP is not a guarantee of a specific educational or functional result for a child with a disability. However, IDEA does provide for revisiting the IEP if the expected progress is not occurring. This particular important because of the Andrew decision, which clarifies the standard for determining whether an IEP is sufficient to provide a free, appropriate public education, is whether the child is offered an IEP that is reasonably calculated to enable them to make progress in light of the circumstances. So that's all about defining progress monitoring, what it means, how it is defined in the law, how it is connected now based on recent court decisions. So we want to move into how progress monitoring looks on the IEP and how you would see it instructionally, how a teacher would convey that information instructionally to you or an IEP team. So most districts in South Carolina continue to use the enriched IEP system. So I took a quick screenshot of the reporting notation on the IEP. So when is it reported? In this particular IEP that I was looking at, it's under the title of annual goals and objectives. In that line of frequency of progress report to parents is 4.5 weeks. So it's an interim. If we think of a typical 9-week period of how school is divided, this particular child's IEP, the progress reporting would happen every 4.5 weeks. And I included a little snippet of that goal so you could see exactly where to look for it on the IEP if you were unsure. So it's after that title of annual header of goals and objectives and before goal 1 is populated on the IEP. So when you look at your copy of the IEP, that's where you're going to look to see what the frequency is for progress reporting. And remember back to that was one of the requirements, is that there is that frequency of reporting that needs to be included in the IEP. So just to have an example of progress monitoring and how you may use progress monitoring to develop a goal, I included a goal here, just a made-up IEP goal about a student who was working on reading at a 4th grade level, and the goal is 55 words per minute, 80 words per minute, as measured by fluency probes. So progress monitoring would help an IEP team determine that this was an appropriate goal by giving that baseline information of where the student was, the 55 words per minute, to help generate, to help draft this goal as a potential goal that would be challenging for the student. So this is where they're starting. And it is projected here that over 36 weeks, the student would be up to reading 80 words per minute on that fourth grade level passage. Another important component here when we're looking at the goal that is in the IEP is the methodology that the goal will be measured with, and that is the fluency probe. So we will look at another example that's more of a functional example, but I wanted to start with this one because there are many ways that goals can be measured. So here we want to measure the increase in a student's ability of reading, and we're going to use that by the fluency probe, which is a standardized measure. So that's an assessment. So your progress monitoring measure here is the fluency probe, and your criteria for success is working up toward 80 words per minute. So let's look into a fluency probe. So this one is a fluency probe at a fourth grade level. This was a passage from Easy CBM. You may be familiar with that. A lot of teachers use these quick assessments as they're looking to see how students are progressing with instruction. So the way this is administered is the teacher gives the student a copy of the reading passage. So the student would only see the words starting two paragraphs. So the student gets a copy of that. The teacher has a copy that you see here, this protocol, this assessment form. There is a minute on the clock and the student starts reading. The teacher looks to mark the errors that the student makes within that time frame and makes a notation when the student reads the last word within that minute. At the bottom, the number of words read minus the errors equals the total words per minute. So this is one example of how a teacher may measure the previous goal, words per minute read, with a fluency probe. So they have to use the appropriate assessment aligned to the grade level. So we're going back to how the student is progressing in the general curriculum because that's what we're using to monitor. So let's look at some sample information. I again just made up these numbers so we could discuss them today. So Easy CVM allowed me to do some assessments, to complete 5 assessments with my student L here, and it graphed the data for me. Easy CVM made a great graph. One thing that's really important about progress monitoring is we need to have multiple data points over a set period of time so you can make an instructional decision. Is the intervention working? Is the instruction not working? And if it's not, what do we need to do? So in this graph, you see on the screen, see down at the bottom there are dates. You'll see multiple colors of lines. The horizontal lines going across represent for the fourth grade level where this student is falling in the percentile rank, which means how they're progressing in relation to other fourth grade peers time of the year. So red is 10th percentile, the orangey color is 25th percentile, the gray is the 50th percentile, and the green is the 90th percentile. So our goal line here is that bright blue color. And if we start at 50 and go up to 80, we see where the student needs to go. So overall, if the student ends at 80, they will still be just above that 10th percentile and below the 25th percentile for reading at the fourth grade level. So when you think about that as an IEP team, you might want to think, is this goal appropriately challenging enough for the student to be able to close that gap and make progress in the general education curriculum? Just a question out there for you to consider. So you will see a bold black vertical line that says 6-minute solutions next to it. Prior to this, with the 45 and the 41 points, instruction was being given, but when the line is on the chart, that's when something new was introduced. So a new intervention was introduced here. And so this particular intervention was the student began partner reading for 6 minutes each session using the program 6-minute solution. So at that point, the teacher noted a change in instruction. Our goal is at the bottom, increase from 55 words read aloud per minute to 80 words read per minute. So based on the passages that were the assessments, the progress monitoring assessments, the fluency probes, and these are all different passages. You'll see at the bottom 4-1, 4-3, 4-8, 4-2. So the student's not reading the same thing over and over again, but they're all on that 4th grade level. So based on the student's performance, the correct words per minute have increased over time after the new instruction was put in place. From 50 words per minute, it goes up to 67 and down to 61. So we would still need a couple more data points to see, is this student currently on the right trajectory to meeting that goal of reading at 80 words per minute. So far, it's looking good. The student is making progress, is reading more fluently, reading more, the words per minute has increased. So the teacher would need to take a couple more data points just to make sure. If we saw more data points below that blue line, then we definitely need to stop and make some instructional decisions. We're looking at these data points over a couple of weeks, probably need 3 more data points, maybe 3 more weeks to make a decision to say, it might be time to think about intensifying instruction in a different way for the student. But right now, things are looking good. The student will stay on goal, on track to meet the goal with the current intervention of adding in that partner reading for 6 minutes each session using the current program. So example 2, this is more of a functional example of progress monitoring. So we're looking at a young girl named Denise who has an intellectual disability, and she's struggling with some functional skills such as hand washing, and she hasn't demonstrated any prerequisite skills for that. So based on her goal, I just pulled out the mastery criteria here, that she's got to demonstrate each step of the hand washing process for 2 consecutive trials before you're fading the prompt for her, fading to release a basic prompt. So Denise is given the cue, wash your hands, and then you will see here the steps 1 through 8 for her to work on hand washing. So this is more of a task analysis representation of progress monitoring. This is just an example of a data sheet that might be used for Denise. And here you see at the top, it says backward chaining. And for this data sheet, it is divided into prompt levels. So the I, G, P, M, and 0 represent different levels of prompting. So I is independent, G is a gestural prompt, P is a partial physical prompt, M is hand over hand manipulation, so requiring full support to do something, and 0 is no response or physically rejected any of that hand over hand manipulation to complete the step. So as we look at this particular data sheet that this teacher is using kind of lends itself to some graphing already. If you start at the bottom with over the paper towel, you see she did well at that. She was able to do that at a mastery level of 75%. And so she was able to move along to the next step. So she was able to move up to step 7. Step 7 took her a little bit longer. The progress monitoring for this student is a little bit more frequent. Sometimes you see some dips up and down through breaks of instruction. For example, between December and January, the student did backslide a little bit, but she wasn't having frequent practice or frequent instruction. So as we go up the data chart to 6, we see that she's continuing to progress. She's continuing to make progress within each of those steps of the task analysis. Well, let's just say she was kind of stalled at 7. She was having a real hard time drying her hands. She continued to need some kind of either hand-over-hand manipulation or partial physical prompt. So maybe the teacher divides that out a little bit into the next example and is looking at just drying her hands. What does it take to do that? And this looks at data in a different way. Percent correct based on just that step 7. So 100 is independent, 75 is gestural, 50 would be partial physical, 25 hand over hand manipulation, and 0 is no response or rejected any assistance. So here we really see an inconsistent data pattern, and the team would really need to look at, how Denise was either receiving prompts prior to what was happening prior to Denise receiving those prompts. Maybe did they need to increase wait time or add additional support such as assistive technology, or maybe Denise is demonstrating it sometimes but not others because of motivation. So what other kind of reinforcers may be added to Denise? And those are instructional decisions based on this progress monitoring data that the teacher has collected. So those are 2 different examples. One academic example, which may not be as frequent as a functional example, as we're trying to move a student through multiple steps to accomplish a goal. Okay, so for a quick review, I wanted to talk about the purpose of bring us back around to the purpose of progress monitoring is to make an informed decision about instruction. So reports of a student's progress to parents is required in the IDEA. You need to know how they are performing based on response to instruction, access to general ed curriculum, and progress within the general ed curriculum. IEP teams work together to use the assessment data to develop and monitor goals to ensure a student's progress. So this use of progress monitoring is a continuous cycle of decision making. Some tips for IEP meetings. So I have some before, during, and after here. Like I said, it is a continuous cycle, but before, you want to know when to expect those progress reports and review those when you get them. Do you know what it means? Is the progress report clear? Make sure you ask any questions for clarification if you're not sure what minimal progress is or adequate progress. Do you have exactly what you need to know? For the students in the examples that I showed, if a progress report came out, did it say how many words per minute that the student was reading based on the addition of that new instruction? For our student who was working on hand washing, did that progress report include information that said she's mastered these skills in the task analysis and now working on this one? Those are things to look for in your progress report. And finally, you as a parent want to provide information about a student's performance of the skill at home, because it is really important to think about generalization of skills. And if a student is doing something at home and not in the school environment, that's important to know too. So during the IEP meeting, make sure you ask questions to understand the assessment results that are found in your present levels, because those are going to be used to develop those goals that the IEP team will review. Make sure to review the goals during the IEP team meeting to ensure that the measurement matches the skill. So fluency probes do match. That does match measurement of words read per minute. A task analysis does match mastery of a hand washing routine. So make sure those match. Review proposed data tracking or progress monitoring method. So when a goal is developed, the team should know how you're going to monitor that. So if it's going to be the fluency probe at the meeting, it should be an example of the probe. or should be an example of that progress monitoring sheet if you're using a prompt level hierarchy like the one shown in the functional example. And then finally, you do want to determine the reporting schedule as an IEP team. So you know the frequency that you'll be expecting to receive those progress reports. After the meeting, you want to clarify any instructional approaches that the teacher is using. That quick little fluency read is something you could do at home for a student who is working on reading more fluently at the 4th grade level. For the student who is doing hand washing, making sure that you're giving the right cue when you're reinforcing that hand washing skill at home and that you're not over prompting. You want to be clear about communicating the strengths and struggles of your student, especially when you're seeing success or you're seeing that they are not they're not showing at home what they're able to do at school. So that continued collaboration is important. And then collaborate with team members to support those instructional practices. How can you as a parent continue to use the same language, provide the same opportunities where the student can practice skills in the home environment? Okay, I know that was fast and that was quick, but I'm going to turn it back over to Melissa to talk about some of the materials you can access from Family Connection.
Well, and Dr. Parish, thank you so much for sharing all of those great tips and strategies. I made several notes myself. I especially liked the chart that you had that was very easy to follow with the tips for the IEP. So thank you so much for that. I'd just like to remind everyone that we do have materials that are available for order. If you go to the Family Connection website, you'll see the web address here at the bottom of the screen. There are materials that you can order. Some things you can download yourself, others we will put in the mail to you. Again, as usual, all of those items are free of charge, so feel free to take a look at that. And then Dr. Parish, if you'll just go to the next slide. We want to remind everyone that we understand that special education is a complicated process. We know that there's a lot to know and understand, and it's also tricky whenever it's your child involved. So if you have any questions or concerns, we do encourage you to reach out to us at our 1-800 number, which is 800-578-8750. And we will get you connected with an education partner, and we are happy to help. So any questions, please feel free to give us a call. We also have a dedicated line for our Spanish-speaking families, and you will see here that number is 888-808-7462. So feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you and help you in any way we can. Thank you again, Dr. Parish. We appreciate all of the information that you shared with us, and we can't wait to put it into action. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.